question. Nobody wants to ask, have you ever looked at the world and asked yourself, why does it seem like the wrong people always end up in charge? Not just in politics, but in companies, in social movements, even in small communities. Again and again, those who rise to the top are not necessarily the wisest, the most compassionate, or the most insightful. Instead, they are often the most ruthless, the most manipulative, or simply the loudest voice in the room. It feels unfair. It feels frustrating. And it makes us wonder whether human beings are destined to always follow the wrong leaders. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and founder of analytical psychology, believed this wasn't random at all. For him, leadership was deeply connected to the hidden layers of the human psyche, and if we really want to understand why the wrong people rise, we have to look inward, not just outward. Jung's ideas give us a disturbing but powerful insight. Societies don't simply elect their leaders. They unconsciously create them. The shadow in leadership. To understand this, we must begin with one of Jung's most famous concepts, the shadow. The shadow is the part of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge. It contains our rejected traits, envy, selfishness, rage, greed, fear. Instead of dealing with these qualities directly, we repress them. We hide them even from ourselves. But here's the problem. What we repress doesn't disappear. The shadow lingers in the unconscious, waiting for an outlet. Now imagine this happening not just on an individual level, but collectively. Jung believed that entire societies develop a collective shadow. For example, a society that prides itself on politeness may secretly harbor enormous anger and resentment. A culture obsessed with purity may unconsciously generate corruption or taboo desires. When these repressed forces build up, they demand release. And often they find expression in the form of a leader. This is why the wrong people so often rise. They embody what others are afraid to admit. They become walking symbols of everything we've buried. Think of history's tyrants, dictators, or corrupt rulers. They didn't rise by accident. They rose because the collective shadow of their society needed a vessel. Someone to carry the darkness that everyone else denied. As Jung put it, the shadow personifies everything that the subject refuses to acknowledge about himself. When entire nations refuse to acknowledge their shadows, they project them onto leaders. Why we follow them. But this raises a troubling question. Why would people choose to follow someone who is clearly destructive, dishonest, or dangerous? Jung's answer: because the unconscious mind doesn't care about truth. It cares about certainty. People crave order. They crave simple answers. They crave someone who can stand at the center of chaos and say, I alone know the way. The wrong leaders are masters of providing certainty. They reduce complexity into black and white slogans. They point to clear enemies. They speak with absolute conviction, and while their solutions may be false, the feeling of clarity is intoxicating. Jung warned that when we do not face our unconscious desires and fears, we end up projecting them outward. We unconsciously look for someone to carry them for us. The leader becomes that carrier. This is why charismatic but destructive leaders rise so easily. They don't represent the people's highest ideals. They represent their unspoken fears. We may say we want truth, but in practice, most people will sacrifice truth for the comfort of certainty. And certainty is what the wrong leaders sell best. The archetype of the strongman. Jung's theory of archetypes explains this dynamic even more clearly. Archetypes are universal symbols embedded in the human psyche. They show up in myths, religions, and stories across all cultures. The hero, the mother, the trickster, the king. These roles live inside our collective imagination. The wrong leaders instinctively know how to play these archetypes. Some take on the father archetype, promising to protect, to punish enemies, and to provide. Others embody the savior, insisting only they can rescue the people from danger. Still others pose as the hero, fighting on behalf of the weak, while secretly feeding their own ego. Archetypes bypass reason. They appeal to something primal, unconscious, and emotional. This is why people often worship leaders as if they were larger than life. They don't just see a politician or a CEO. They see an archetype, a symbol of protection, redemption, or revenge. Jung warned that this is dangerous because it blinds us. We stop judging the leader as a human being and start relating to them as a mythical figure. In this trance, charisma matters more than competence, and promises matter more than results. That's why the wrong people rise so easily. They are not leaders in the ordinary sense. They are actors playing roles written deep in the human psyche. The price we pay, but when societies elevate leaders who embody their shadows, there is always a cost. Jung described the danger of mass psychology. In mass psychology, individuals stop thinking for themselves. They merge into a collective identity. The leader becomes the mind of the group, and the people surrender responsibility. This regression is seductive. Instead of wrestling with difficult questions, the crowd looks to the leader for answers. Instead of facing their fears, they outsource them. But the price is high. Individuality collapses. Freedom is traded for safety. And soon, morality itself bends to the will of the leader. History gives us brutal examples. Entire nations have followed destructive figures into war, oppression, and even genocide. And what's terrifying is that they didn't just obey out of fear. They followed willingly, even enthusiastically. The leader was not imposed on them. The leader was their collective shadow. And to reject him would be to reject themselves. Jung saw this as the most dangerous phenomenon of the 20th century, mass movements where unconscious projections overtook reason. He believed that without awareness, societies would keep repeating this cycle. The inner solution, so what can be done? How do we stop the wrong people from always leading? For Jung, the answer wasn't just political. It was psychological. The key lies in individuation, the process of integrating the unconscious into conscious awareness. This means facing your shadow directly. Instead of denying our anger, envy, and selfishness, we must acknowledge them. We must admit, yes, I have these traits. They are part of me. When we do this, the shadow loses its grip. It no longer needs to be projected onto someone else. And when a manipulative leader comes along trying to embody those qualities, we are not seduced, because we have already confronted them within ourselves. Imagine a society where people were deeply self-aware, where citizens were not driven by hidden fears or unconscious projections. In such a society, leaders who rely on manipulation would fail quickly. Charisma alone would not be enough. Empty promises would collapse. Jung believed this inner work was humanity's only true safeguard, because the only way to stop following the wrong leaders is to stop needing them. The moment we integrate our own shadow, we no longer require someone else to carry it for us. The call to awareness. So why do the wrong people always lead? Because societies choose leaders who reflect their unconscious shadows. We don't simply elect individuals. We elect mirrors. The destructive leader is not an outsider. He is our collective shadow, brought to life. Carl Jung's message was clear. If we want better leaders, we must become better followers. Followers who are conscious, self-aware, and unafraid to face their own darkness, because when we deny our shadow, we hand it to someone else, and they lead us straight into it. The work begins with each of us. The moment you confront your shadow, you stop feeding theirs, and in that moment, the wrong people lose their power. That's when the right leaders, wise, compassionate, and conscious, finally have the chance to emerge. The seduction of power. Jung often warned that power has a hypnotic effect on the psyche. Power doesn't just corrupt those who hold it, it also corrupts those who witness it. We are drawn to power in the same way that moths are drawn to flame. It gives us the illusion of safety. When someone appears strong, decisive, and unshakable, we unconsciously imagine that by attaching ourselves to them, we too become strong. But this is an illusion. What actually happens is the opposite. The more we cling to external power, the more we weaken ourselves. Jung wrote that people project their own unlived potential onto figures of authority. Instead of becoming courageous themselves, they worship someone courageous. Instead of pursuing wisdom, they idolize a figure who claims to have it. And so, the wrong leaders rise not because they are extraordinary, but because we give away the extraordinary parts of ourselves. The crowd versus the individual. Another crucial insight from Jung is that the psyche behaves differently in a crowd than it does in solitude. As individuals, we may act responsibly, thoughtfully, and morally. But once absorbed into a crowd, those qualities dissolve. We no longer think as individuals. We think as a mass. In the mass, the lowest instincts rise to the surface. People regress into a childlike state, craving a parent figure to guide them. And this is where the wrong leaders thrive. They know how to address the crowd, not the individual. They speak in slogans, not in nuanced truths. They stir emotions, not reason. They don't care about you as a person. They care about you as part of the herd. Jung warned that the larger the crowd, the more dangerous the leader becomes. Because the crowd is never conscious, only the individual can be. The shadow in ourselves, it is easy to point fingers and say, the wrong people are in charge because others are foolish. But Jung would tell us to look closer. The wrong leaders thrive because we unconsciously want them to. Each of us carries a shadow, and each of us is capable of projecting it outward. That shadow might contain aggression we pretend we don't feel. It might contain selfishness we deny. It might even contain the desire for dominance or revenge. When we refuse to see these traits in ourselves, we unconsciously look for someone else to carry them for us. And that someone often becomes the leader. This is why the work of self-awareness is not just personal, it's political. Every time you deny your own shadow, you strengthen the shadow of the leader. The myth of the savior, one of the most dangerous illusions Jung warned against, was the myth of the savior. When life feels unbearable, people long for rescue. They imagine that one figure, a hero, a revolutionary, a genius, a prophet, will arrive to save them from suffering. This is an ancient archetype. Religions are built on it, stories repeated endlessly. And in politics, it becomes devastating. The wrong leaders often rise by presenting themselves as saviors. They claim, only I can fix it, only I know the truth, only I can protect you. But Jung insisted that no savior can rescue us from ourselves. The work of transformation is inner work. The true savior is found in the depths of the unconscious, not in the speeches of a charismatic leader. When people surrender to the myth of the savior, they give away their power. And in doing so, they allow the wrong people to lead them into ruin, awakening the conscious leader. Within finally, Jung believed that if humanity was to escape the cycle of destructive leadership, it had to awaken a new kind of leader, one who does not rule by charisma or manipulation, but by consciousness. Such leaders are rare because they must first do the inner work of individuation. They must face their own shadows before they can guide others. They must resist the temptation to play archetypes and instead remain authentic. But here's the challenge. Conscious leaders cannot exist without conscious followers. They require people who have also done the inner work. People who do not crave saviors, who do not blindly follow crowds, who do not project their darkness onto others. This is the ultimate message of Jung. The outer world will not change until the inner world does. Leaders are mirrors. If we want better leaders, we must first become better reflections. The call to awareness. Why do the wrong people always lead? Because human beings, as individuals and as societies, are constantly projecting their unconscious shadows. Leaders rise not because of their greatness, but because they embody the darkness we refuse to face. The tyrant, the manipulator, the false savior. They are not separate from us. They are the shadows we have disowned. Carl Jung's warning was clear. If we want to stop the wrong people from leading, we must stop needing them. And the only way to do that is to confront the hidden parts of ourselves. Every time we integrate our shadow, we withdraw power from destructive leaders. Every time we awaken as individuals, we weaken the grip of the crowd. Every time we refuse the myth of the savior, we open the door for conscious leadership. The moment you confront your shadow, you stop feeding theirs. And that is the only way the right people will ever lead. The Fear of Freedom. Carl Jung once wrote that modern humanity believes itself to be free, yet few truly understand the weight of freedom. We imagine freedom as liberation, as the ability to choose and act according to our desires. But in practice, freedom means something far heavier. It means standing without excuses, without authority to hide behind, and without an external savior to blame. And that, Jung recognized, terrifies us. The paradox of human freedom at first glance. People everywhere celebrate freedom. Nations are founded on it, wars are fought for it, and revolutions are justified by its promise. Yet as soon as people gain freedom, history shows an alarming pattern. They hand it back. They surrender it to kings, to dictators, to demagogues, or to bureaucracies that offer the illusion of order. Why? Because freedom is not simply a gift, it is a responsibility. To be free means to confront one's own shadow directly. It means no longer blaming the system, the government, or the leader for the state of one's soul. Instead, it means asking the terrifying question, what am I doing with my life? For Jung, this is precisely why the wrong people rise to power. They appear at the exact moment when the masses want to escape the weight of freedom. Instead of demanding responsibility, such leaders offer release. They say, "Don't worry about making hard choices. I will choose for you. Don't confront your shadow. I will define your enemies for you. Don't wrestle with uncertainty. I will give you certainty, even if it's false." Freedom and the child archetype. Jung noted that when faced with overwhelming responsibility, the psyche often regresses to an earlier stage of development, the stage of the child. Children, after all, are not free. They are cared for, guided, and disciplined by authority figures. To return to this state is to trade freedom for the comforting illusion of parental authority. The wrong leaders thrive precisely because they embody this parental archetype. They present themselves as the strict father, the nurturing mother, or the protective guardian. And for many, that feels safer than the lonely weight of freedom. In this sense, wrong leadership is not imposed from above, it is invited from below. People unconsciously cry out for someone to take their freedom away, and in that opening, authoritarian figures step in. The fear behind the fear. But why is freedom so frightening? Jung would argue that at its root, freedom forces us to face the unknown. It strips away excuses and illusions, leaving only the raw confrontation with the self. When no one else can be blamed, when no external authority dictates your path, the question becomes unbearable. Who am I? Most people do not want to know. They would rather live in a comforting dream provided by an external voice. They would rather believe in lies that give structure than face truths that dissolve it. This is why cults, political movements, and charismatic strongmen so easily capture devotion. They give the illusion that someone else already knows the answers. The tragedy, Jung observed, is that this trade never works for long. The surrender of freedom may feel like safety at first, but it inevitably breeds tyranny. What was once an escape from responsibility becomes a prison of oppression. The historical echoes, history's bloodiest dictators rose in moments when people were overwhelmed by freedom. After wars, revolutions, or economic collapse, freedom came hand in hand with chaos. Suddenly, citizens had to build new societies from scratch. They had to confront uncertainty, diversity, and competing truths. Rather than face this anxiety, people turned to figures who promised absolute order. In their desperation, they chose men who offered simple certainty over complex freedom. And so the 20th century saw shadows embodied in leaders whose cruelty was only possible because the masses unconsciously invited them in. Jung's insight into the fear of freedom is a warning for every age, not only for the past. Whenever people speak loudly about liberty while secretly yearning for authority, the door opens for destructive leadership. Whenever freedom is reduced to slogans rather than lived as responsibility, we risk repeating the same cycles of projection and surrender. The solution, Jung would argue, begins not with politics, but with psychology. Each individual must confront their own fear of freedom. They must recognize the temptation to give it away and resist it. Only when people integrate this shadow, the desire to escape responsibility, can societies resist the wrong leaders who so eagerly wait to claim it. Freedom is both our greatest gift and our heaviest burden. To embrace it is to grow up, to leave the safety of childhood, and to stand as individuals in the storm of life. The wrong leaders rise not because freedom fails, but because we abandon it. In Jung's words, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And in our avoidance, we summon those who promise to save us, only to enslave us. The true question is not, why do the wrong people lead? But why do we fear leading ourselves?